They laughed at her. They mocked her. To them, she was just a cleaning lady with no future. But when fate put her in the CEO's path, she didn't just survive. She changed the game. This isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call. A lesson on fighting back, proving your worth, and never letting the world define you. If you're ready for that, smash the like button and let's dive in. The mop felt heavier than usual. Claire Evans tightened her grip, forcing her exhausted arms to keep moving. The floor of the five-star hotel glistened under the dim evening lights, but she could barely see it. Her vision blurred from the lack of sleep. She had been pulling double shifts for a week now, scrubbing floors in the morning, covering for lazy co-workers at night. Just one more room, she whispered to herself. Just one more, then she could go home, collapse onto her tiny mattress, and pretend she had a life outside of this job. But fate had other plans. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway, a sharp burst of laughter echoed from the reception desk. Claire didn't need to turn around. She already knew they were talking about her. Look at her, still here at this hour? What, does she live in a supply closet? Maybe she's waiting for a rich guest to accidentally notice her. Dream on, Cinderella. Scrubbing toilets is as high as you'll ever go. The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Claire gritted her teeth, her fingers tightening around the mop handle. She could feel their eyes on her, the smug grins, the silent judgment. But she refused to react. They don't know me. They don't know what I've survived. She took a deep breath, rolled her shoulders back, and forced herself to keep moving. She wasn't here to impress them. She was here to survive. The last stop of the night. The royal suite. Claire pushed open the door, stepping into a world so far from her own it might as well have been another planet. Everything in the room screamed power and wealth, pristine silk sheets, gold accents, a minibar stocked with drinks more expensive than her rent, but it was the bathroom that stole her breath. It was bigger than her entire apartment. Who the hell needs a bathroom this big? She muttered, filling the sink with disinfectant. Her body screamed for rest, but the job wasn't done yet. She scrubbed, wiped, polished, every movement on autopilot. But as she bent over to clean around the bathtub, exhaustion finally won. Just 5 seconds, she thought, leaning her head on her arm. Just 5. Darkness. Her body betrayed her, and before she knew it, she had slumped over and fell asleep. The door swung open. Logan Carter, billionaire CEO of Carter Hotels, stepped into his suite, ready to shut out the world. He was exhausted. The endless meetings, the fake smiles, the politics of running an empire. He needed silence, a hot shower, and sleep. He unbuttoned his shirt, loosening his tie as he walked straight to the bathroom, eager to rinse the day away. But the moment he opened the door, his world flipped upside down. A woman, sleeping, on his toilet. Logan froze. His mind scrambled for logic. Who the hell was she? A thief? A crazy fan? Someone from corporate pulling a sick joke? His pulse skyrocketed as panic and fury collided. What the hell? The shout shattered the silence. Claire's body jolted awake, her balance lost in an instant. She tumbled forward, sending a bucket of cleaning supplies crashing to the floor. The strong scent of bleach filled the air. For a split second, all she saw was the half-dressed man in front of her, tall, dark-haired, sculpted like a Greek god, and pissed off beyond reason. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Oh God, this wasn't just any guest. This was Logan Carter, the boss, the owner of the damn hotel, and she had just been found asleep in his bathroom. Her brain short-circuited. There was no good way to explain this, no way to fix this. She did the only thing her panicked mind could come up with. I didn't rob you, she blurted out, raising her hands like a criminal caught red-handed. Logan blinked. What? I just, she stammered, pointing wildly at the mop and bucket as if they were proof of her innocence. I was cleaning and I guess Logan crossed his arms. Decided to take a nap in my bathroom? His voice dripped with disbelief. Claire's face burned. I didn't decide to. My body just shut down. He pinched the bridge of his nose, taking a deep breath. This was insane. Why was she still here? I should fire you, he said flatly. Claire's stomach dropped, but then Logan did something completely unexpected. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and walked out of the bathroom. Claire blinked. Wait. What? Confused, she scrambled after him, nearly tripping over the mop bucket. He stopped at the kitchen counter, picked up a coffee cup, and turned to her with an unreadable expression. Do you drink coffee? Huh. Claire had barely caught her breath from the ridiculous encounter in Logan Carter's bathroom when the world decided to set her life on fire. She had thought the worst was over. She had thought she could quietly go back to her job, avoid any more embarrassment, and pretend it never happened. She was dead wrong. It started small. A few sideways glances from her coworkers. A hushed conversation that abruptly ended the second she walked into the break room. Then came the not-so-subtle snickers. Sleeping your way to the top, huh, Claire? Damn, didn't know the CEO had a thing for janitors. Did you scrub his floors, or were you busy on your knees doing something else? The words hit like bullets, sharp and unforgiving, but Claire had been underestimated her whole life. She had learned how to take a hit. So she gritted her teeth, kept her head down, and kept working. But then, the internet got involved. By morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The headlines were everywhere. CEO Logan Carter caught with maid in private suite. Secret affair exposed. From mop to mansion, how Claire Evans seduced her way into power. The Cinderella story that's too good to be true. Someone had leaked a blurry photo of Logan and Claire together outside the suite. She had been mid-sprint, chasing after him in a desperate attempt to explain herself. But the camera caught just enough. The angle, the lighting, the timing. It looked exactly like she had just woken up in his hotel room, hair messy, face flushed, like she had spent the night there. The comments were worse. Wow, women really have no shame these days. Let's be real, she didn't accidentally fall asleep in his bathroom. She knew exactly what she was doing. Gold digger, end of story. Claire felt sick. She wasn't naive. She knew how brutal people could be. But this was a level of cruelty she hadn't been prepared for. The people she worked with, the guests she quietly served, the world that had never noticed her before. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion about her. And they all wanted to see her fail. If Claire had hoped to find some support within the hotel staff, she was a fool. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were full-blown accusations. She's a liar. She's playing innocent, but we all know she's just another gold-digging whore. She thinks she's better than us now, doesn't she? Claire heard every single word. And then came the worst of it. She was called into the manager's office. Claire, Mr. Donovan, the hotel manager, leaned forward, sighing dramatically like this was exhausting for him. You have to understand, this situation is causing a disruption. Her stomach twisted. She already knew where this was going. Some of the other employees, well, they don't feel comfortable working with you right now. They think this negative attention is bad for the hotel's reputation. She let out a bitter laugh. Right. And I bet none of them are the ones being attacked online. Donovan gave her a condescending smile, the kind that made her want to break something. We just think it's best if you take a temporary leave, just until things settle down. Temporary leave. That was just a polite way of saying we don't want you here anymore. Claire clenched her fists. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the chair across the room. Instead, she smiled. Fine, she said, voice steady. But when I come back, you'll regret this. Donovan chuckled, like she was nothing but a child throwing a tantrum. We'll see, Miss Evans. That night, Logan called her. She stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. She should be furious at him. This was his fault. If he had just fired her that night, none of this would have happened. But against her better judgment, she picked up. Claire. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the tension underneath. I saw the articles. No shit. He sighed. I'm handling it. She barked out a laugh. Handling it? Oh, great. Maybe you can schedule a press conference where you tell the world you didn't sleep with your janitor. I'm sure that'll go well. Silence. Then Logan's voice dropped lower. Do you really think I'm going to let them do this to you? Claire's breath caught. Something about the way he said it, firm, absolute, made her chest tighten. "I'm going to fix this," he promised. But she wasn't convinced, because deep down, Claire knew something he didn't. This wasn't just about the scandal. This was about power, and in this world, people like her were never meant to win. That night, Claire lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her body shaking from rage. She thought about every time she had been told she wasn't good enough, every time someone looked at her like she was nothing, every time she had swallowed her pride and stayed silent. Not this time, not anymore. If the world wanted to paint her as the villain, fine, but she wasn't going down quietly. Claire Evans was about to rewrite the entire damn story. Claire's battle had just begun. They thought she was weak. They thought she would break. But she was about to show them exactly who the hell she was. Right now, you've seen how one rumor, one lie can destroy a person's life overnight. But what happens next? Does Claire fight back? Does she expose the truth? Or does she let them win? If you're as fired up as she is, comment 1, she won't back down, and hit that subscribe button. Share this video if you believe in fighting for what's right. And trust me, you need to see what's coming next. Keep watching. It's about to get explosive. Explosion. The world wanted Claire Evans to be a joke, a scandal, a nobody. She had spent the past week suffocating under the weight of humiliation, watching her name get dragged through the dirt. She had been mocked, cast aside, and treated like she was disposable. But tonight they were all going to see exactly what she was capable of. Logan Carter leaned against the bar, arms crossed, his piercing blue eyes studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. The restaurant was empty except for the two of them. It was late, the city outside buzzing with life, but inside the silence was suffocating. On the counter in front of her sat a single cup of coffee. "Drink it," Logan said, his voice unreadable. Claire didn't move. She didn't need to. The second he set it down, she had already caught the scent. Burnt, bitter, oversugared. "This is a joke," she muttered. Logan raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" She clenched her jaw. This wasn't a taste test. It was a challenge. "You want me to prove myself?" she thought. Fine. She picked up the cup, brought it close, and took a deep breath. The second the scent hit her nose, she knew exactly what had gone wrong. "The beans were roasted at too high a temperature," she said, keeping her voice steady. "It scorched the natural oils, killing the complexity of the flavor. The bitterness is overwhelming, so they dumped in sugar to mask it, but it only makes it worse. The finish is flat, no depth, no balance." She finally took a sip, just to be sure. She was right. She placed the cup down and looked straight at Logan. "This is garbage." For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then Logan smirked. "Interesting," he murmured, tilting his head. "You got all that just from the smell?" Claire crossed her arms. "Did I get something wrong?" He let out a low chuckle and shook his head. "Number you didn't." Claire had expected him to laugh at her, to dismiss her with the same arrogant indifference the world had shown her. But he didn't. Instead, Logan reached behind the bar, grabbed another cup, and placed it in front of her. "Try this one." Claire narrowed her eyes, suspicious. But she lifted the cup, inhaled deeply, and let the notes of the brew hit her senses. Smooth, nutty, a hint of caramel. She took a sip, letting the warmth coat her tongue before she spoke. "Better. This one was roasted properly. You can taste the natural sweetness of the beans. No burnt aftertaste. Whoever made this actually knew what they were doing." She placed the cup down. "It's still not perfect, though." Logan leaned in slightly. "Why?" Claire glanced at him, surprised that he was actually listening, actually considering what she had to say. She ran her fingers along the rim of the cup. "The balance is slightly off. They used a high-quality bean, but the grind was too fine for the brewing method. It over-extracted some of the harsher tannins, making it more acidic than it should be." She paused, looking up. "You want it perfect? Adjust the grind size." Logan stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her shock, he let out a short laugh. Not mocking, not condescending. Impressed. Claire felt something shift in the air. She had spent her entire life being talked over, ignored, dismissed, but right now, Logan Carter was listening to her. Logan exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another disaster waiting to happen." Claire snorted. "Thanks." "But now?" He shook his head. "Now I think you might be the most interesting thing that's ever walked into this hotel." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine, because for the first time in a long time, Claire wasn't just a nobody. She was something more, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The next morning, Claire walked into the staff lounge like a war was about to break out, because, in a way, it was. The second she stepped inside, all eyes were on her. The same co-workers who had laughed at her, whispered about her, spread lies about her. Now they were watching her, waiting, seeing if she would break. She didn't. Instead, she poured herself a cup of coffee, leaned against the counter, and took a slow sip, completely ignoring the suffocating silence around her. Finally, someone spoke. "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" Claire lowered her cup and met their gaze head-on. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," she said, her voice calm, "but I do know that I'm more than what you tried to reduce me to." A scoff. "Please, you're just riding on the CEO's attention." Claire tilted her head. "Am I?" She placed her cup down, standing tall. "Then why did he put me in charge of reworking the hotel's coffee program?" Silence. Dead, heavy, suffocating silence. Someone gasped. Another whispered. "She's lying." Claire smirked. "Am I?" And then, as if on cue, Logan Carter himself walked in. "Claire," his deep voice cut through the room, sending a shiver down everyone's spine. "I need you in the tasting room in 10 minutes. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to, because his presence alone was enough to send a very clear message to everyone in that room. Claire Evans was no longer just a cleaning girl. She was a problem. And they had just lost the war. As Claire walked past them, she didn't gloat. She didn't stop to see their reactions. She didn't have to, because she had already won. But this was just the beginning. They wanted her gone. They wanted her to be weak. But Claire Evans wasn't weak, and she was about to show the world exactly what she was made of. They had spent days trying to break her. The scandal, the whispers, the way they looked at her like she was nothing. Claire Evans was supposed to disappear, fade into the background like every other nobody who tried to step into a world that didn't belong to them. But here she was, standing in the middle of the executive kitchen of one of the most prestigious hotels in the city, surrounded by men in pristine chef coats who would rather burn their own dishes than take her seriously. And she was about to humiliate every single one of them. Let me get this straight. Chef Daniel Moreau leaned against the counter, arms crossed, smirking. His eyes raked over Claire like she was a cockroach he had no interest in squashing himself. "You," he drawled, dragging out the word, "a janitor, are going to tell me how to fix my kitchen?" The other chefs snickered. Someone muttered something in French, something Claire was sure wasn't a compliment. Across the room, Logan Carter stood with an unreadable expression. He had dragged her into this mess, thrown her to the wolves, and now he was watching, studying, waiting to see if she'd sink or swim. Fine. She was about to swim. Claire reached for the first dish on the counter. "I don't need to fix your kitchen." She picked up a fork, sliced into the meat, and popped a bite into her mouth. "I just need to show you how much you've already screwed it up." The room went silent. Claire chewed slowly, savoring the flavors, analyzing every element. Then she set the fork down and met Moreau's glare head-on. "This is wrong," Moreau scoffed. "Enlighten me, then." Claire exhaled through her nose, counting the seconds in her head, giving them a chance to realize what was about to happen. Then, she pointed at the protein. The steak was seared at too high a temperature, locking in the wrong kind of juices. Instead of keeping the inside tender, you trapped in bitterness. That's why it has a burnt aftertaste. A sharp inhale from someone across the room. Claire moved to the sauce. "The reduction is a joke. Someone overdid the balsamic, probably to cover up the fact that the base was weak. And let me guess, you let it sit too long before plating?" Moreau's jaw tightened. She didn't wait for confirmation. Instead, she picked up the second dish. This one's worse. Moreau's fists clenched. She took a bite. Her lips curled in distaste. You tried to make a beurre blanc, didn't you? She shook her head. You failed. Miserably. Someone coughed. She pushed the plate away. This sauce is splitting, you see that? She gestured to the oily layer separating from the butter. That happens when you either use too much heat or don't balance the acid correctly. My guess? You rushed it, probably because you were too busy being pissed off that your boss invited me in here. Silence. Then, someone laughed. Logan. She turned to him, and there it was. That damn smirk. The same one he had given her the night she destroyed his coffee. Claire knew what it meant now. He knew she was right, and so did everyone else. Moreau's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. You think you're so smart, he spat. Claire arched an eyebrow. No. She tapped the plate with her fork. I know I am. Moreau slammed a hand down on the counter, his voice rising. You don't belong here. And there it was. The truth. The real reason for all of this. She could have been a Michelin-starred chef, and they still wouldn't have accepted her. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because she wasn't one of them. Claire leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough for the words to feel like a threat. You're scared, aren't you? Moreau froze. You can smell it, can't you? She continued, her voice smooth as silk. The shift, the cracks in your perfect little kingdom. You know that the second someone like me proves they belong here, the whole system starts to collapse. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Claire picked up a napkin, wiped the corner of her mouth, and tossed it onto the counter. Maybe it's time to collapse. Logan finally spoke. She's right. Moreau's head snapped toward him. Sir. Logan cut him off with a single look. I said, she's right. He folded his arms, his tone leaving no room for argument. And I'm done wasting my time with people who can't accept the truth. Moreau went still. And then Logan turned to Claire. You're in charge of the tasting program from now on. The room erupted. The other chefs balked, voices rising in protest. But Logan wasn't listening. Moreau wasn't listening. Because Moreau had just lost. Claire didn't react right away. She didn't let the victory settle on her face. She just held Logan's gaze, waiting for him to take it back. He didn't. He just smirked. Still think you don't belong here? Claire let out a slow breath. Then, for the first time in days, she smiled. No, she said, straightening her shoulders. I think I just took your place. Claire walked out of that kitchen with her head held high. She could still hear them talking, whispering, plotting. But it didn't matter. She had done what no one thought she could. She had walked into their world, ripped it apart, and built something better. And now they had no choice but to watch her rise. Claire just flipped the script on an entire industry. She wasn't supposed to win. She wasn't supposed to belong. But she didn't just prove them wrong, she took their place. Now, here's the question. Would you have done the same? If you've ever been doubted, underestimated, or told you don't belong, comment, "Watch me rise," below, and trust me, this is just the beginning. Subscribe now because the next part of this story, it's about to get even bigger. More power, more enemies, more shocking twists. You don't want to miss this. Explosion. They had laughed at her, mocked her, treated her like a nobody. And now they were silent. Claire Evans stood in the center of the executive kitchen, her heart pounding, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. Across from her, Daniel Moreau, the hotel's executive chef, stood rigid, arms crossed, his face carved from stone. She had humiliated him once already, picked apart his dishes, exposed his flaws, shattered his pride in front of his entire brigade. But that wasn't enough, because Moreau wasn't just angry, he was out for blood. All right, he said, his voice low and sharp, slicing through the tension in the air. You think you're so damn smart? Let's see you cook. A ripple of shock went through the kitchen staff. Someone gasped. Someone whispered. Claire? Cooking? This was no longer about proving her knowledge. This was about proving her worth. The moment had come. She could walk away, leave while she was still ahead, or she could fight. Claire squared her shoulders. I accept. Moreau didn't waste time. He grabbed an apron, tossed it to Claire, and barked out instructions. You have 30 minutes, 1 dish, it better be flawless. Claire caught the apron and tied it around her waist. Moreau stepped back, smirking. And just to be clear, his voice was dripping in condescension. No tricks, no tasting and critiquing. This time you cook, and when you fail, you leave this kitchen for good. Claire met his glare with fire in her eyes. We'll see who leaves. Logan Carter, standing in the corner with arms crossed, raised an eyebrow but didn't interfere. This was her fight, and she was ready. The clock started. Claire moved fast. Her hands knew what to do before her brain even caught up. Years of cooking in tiny, dimly lit kitchens. Years of stretching ingredients because she had no other choice. Years of learning flavors not from a classroom, but from survival. She didn't just know food. She understood it. She could feel the kitchen staff watching her, waiting for her to choke, to hesitate, to prove them right. But she didn't. Instead, she thrived. She seared, seasoned, tasted, adjusted where needed. Across from her, Moreau moved like a machine, his blade flashing under the fluorescent lights, his movements precise and calculated. But Claire cooked with instinct, with passion, and she refused to lose. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The entire kitchen held its breath. Claire wiped the rim of her plate, adjusting the garnish at the last second. 3, 2, 1, hands off. The kitchen erupted. Chefs whispered, bets were exchanged, and the tension crackled in the air like a storm about to break. 2 plates were set before Logan Carter, one from Moreau, one from her. The CEO leaned forward, studying them. One dish was elegant, structured, a textbook perfect execution of French cuisine. The other, raw, passionate. A plate that told a story. Logan picked up a fork, tasted Moreau's first, nodded, expression neutral. Then he turned to Claire's. She could feel her pulse in her throat. He took a bite, paused. Something shifted in his expression, something subtle, but there. He set the fork down and exhaled. Moreau, he said, voice calm. Yours is technically perfect. Moreau smirked. But Claire's? Logan looked at her, really looked at her. Hers is better. The kitchen exploded. Moreau's smirk vanished. The color drained from his face as the realization hit him like a truck. He had just been beaten. By her, by a janitor, by the girl they had all laughed at. The staff stared, whispers swirling through the air like wildfire. Moreau's grip tightened on the counter. This is ridiculous. Logan's gaze hardened. No, it's reality. Moreau clenched his jaw. You want her in this kitchen? Fine, let her try to survive. But don't expect me to... Pack your knives, Moreau. Silence. Moreau blinked. What? Logan didn't blink, didn't hesitate. You're fired. The room froze. You've run this kitchen the same way for years, Logan continued, his voice even but sharp. And it's been good, but good isn't enough anymore. He turned to Claire. Claire sees what others don't. She has talent, and I'm not in the business of ignoring talent. Moreau opened his mouth to argue. Then he closed it. Because it didn't matter. He had lost. And Claire had won. Moreau stormed out. The kitchen staff didn't know what to do, who to look at, what to believe. Claire felt their eyes on her. Some held resentment, some held shock, and some held something close to respect. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. She had fought. She had won. She had proven herself. Logan smirked, crossing his arms. So, Chef Evans... She blinked. Chef? Well, you're certainly not just a janitor anymore, are you? She huffed out a breathless laugh. Number she wasn't. The system had tried to break her. But now she owned it. Claire Evans had never been the type to dream big. She had spent years cleaning up after people who never bothered to learn her name. She had survived whispers, smirks, and condescending stares from people who thought they were better than her. But now, she had just done the impossible. She had stepped into their world, faced down one of the most powerful chefs in the industry, and won. And the moment Logan Carter lifted his fork, took a bite of her dish, and smiled, Claire knew something had changed. She was no longer invisible. She was a threat. The kitchen was dead silent. Every chef, every cook, every server, watching, waiting. Logan Carter, the man who had built this empire with his own hands, sat at the head of the table. In front of him, her dish. A dish that wasn't just food. It was a declaration, a war cry. She had risked everything on this plate. If it wasn't good enough, if she had made a single mistake, she would never recover. Logan picked up his fork, sliced through the dish, and brought a piece to his lips. The room held its breath. Claire could hear her own heartbeat slamming against her ribs. Then he exhaled slowly, looked up at her, and smiled. Damn. His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough. He leaned back in his chair, still savoring the taste, then shook his head, almost in disbelief. This, he said, lifting his fork again, is outstanding. The kitchen exploded. Half of the staff gasped. The other half glared. Claire felt something warm flood through her chest, a mix of relief, pride, and something dangerously close to victory. She had done it. She had won. But she didn't have time to enjoy it, because in that same instant she knew. She had just made enemies. She should have expected it. No one wanted to see someone like her win, not her former co-workers, who still whispered that she had slept her way into the kitchen, not the executive chefs, who saw her as a walking insult to their years of training, and definitely not the guests, the socialites, the wealthy elite, who had never expected a girl from the janitor's closet to set foot in their world. It started with the whispers. She got lucky. Logan Carter is just amused by her. It won't last. She doesn't deserve this. She doesn't belong here. Then came the articles. Headlines popped up overnight. Who is Claire Evans, the hotel maid who thinks she's a chef? From mops to menus, is this just another PR stunt? Does Logan Carter have a new favorite? They painted her like some charity case, like Logan had plucked her off the street and handed her success out of pity, as if she hadn't earned every second of this, as if she hadn't fought, as if she hadn't bled for it. Claire clenched her fists, scrolling through the comments online. They didn't know her. They didn't see the years of struggle. They didn't see her fighting to survive. But she saw them, and she refused to let them win. 2 days later, Claire walked into the restaurant kitchen like a storm ready to break. The tension hit her immediately. She could feel the eyes on her, the anger, the jealousy, the fear, because they knew she had proven herself, and they hated her for it. Daniel Moreau, the former executive chef, had been disgraced after their last battle. But his people? They were still here, and they wanted revenge. Look who decided to show up, one of the sous chefs muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Claire didn't even flinch. She walked straight to the prep station, grabbed an apron, and tied it around her waist. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to win. That night, after service, Logan Carter found her. He didn't look angry. He didn't look amused. He just looked interested. "You're not backing down." It wasn't a question. Claire met his gaze, her hands still dusted with flour, the scent of garlic and butter clinging to her skin. "No," she said simply. "I'm not." Logan studied her for a moment. Then his lips curled into that same infuriating smirk. "Good." She blinked. "Good?" He shrugged. "I wanted to see how far you'd go before you broke." Her jaw clenched. "And?" His smirk widened. "You're still standing." Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But tonight, she had won. And tomorrow, she would fight again. Claire wasn't supposed to win. She wasn't supposed to step into their world and take what they thought was theirs. But she did. And now, they want her gone. What do you think? Should she keep fighting or walk away? Comment "keep fighting" below. Hit like if you've ever been doubted and proved them wrong. Subscribe now, because in the next part of this story, the fight gets even more brutal. You won't believe what they do next. Keep watching. Claire Evans thought she had won. She had fought for her place. She had proved them wrong, but she forgot one thing. The rich don't lose. Not without a fight. And now, they were coming for her. It started with a single headline, then another, then another. By the time Claire saw it, the damage had already been done. Hotel maid or CEO's mistress? The scandal-rocking Logan Carter's empire? Sleeping her way to the top? The truth about Claire Evans's sudden rise. From janitor to chef, but at what cost? Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the articles. They didn't talk about her skills. They didn't talk about her victories. They painted her as a fraud, as a woman who had used her body, not her talent, as someone who had never belonged in the first place. Claire felt sick, because it wasn't just random gossip anymore. This was an attack, a calculated, brutal public execution, and it was working. She walked into the kitchen that night and everything was different. The conversations that used to hush when she walked in, now they didn't even bother lowering their voices. I knew it was too good to be true. She played the game well, I'll give her that. She really thought she belonged here? Please? Even the ones who had supported her before, who had smiled at her, congratulated her, now looked at her like she was dirt. And the worst part, she wasn't even surprised, because this was how the world worked. They didn't care about her talent. They didn't care about her fight. The second they found an excuse to tear her down, they took it. And they were enjoying every second of it. Claire barely made it into Logan's office before the storm hit. The door slammed behind her, and when she turned, Logan Carter was already on his phone, barking orders. "I don't care who we have to sue," he snapped. "I want names. I want sources. I want this shut down before the end of the damn day. Stop." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough. Logan's head snapped up, his icy blue eyes burning. "Stop!" His jaw clenched. "Claire, they just called you." "I know." She cut him off. Her stomach twisted at the thought of those headlines, those whispers, at the way they had turned her name into a weapon. But she wasn't going to let them win, and she wasn't going to let Logan fight this battle for her. She took a deep breath. No lawsuits, no PR statements, no damage control. Logan stared at her. "You're joking." Claire's jaw tightened. "I'm serious." Logan ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "Claire, do you even realize what they're doing to you?" "Yes," she said firmly. "They're humiliating you. I know. They're trying to destroy you. I know." She took a step forward. "But if we fight them their way, we lose." Logan narrowed his eyes. "Then what's your plan?" Claire's fingers curled into fists. "They want to see me break. They want me to run, to disappear, to fade into nothing." She met his gaze, fire in her veins. "So I'm going to do the one thing they don't expect." Logan crossed his arms. "And that is?" Claire lifted her chin. "I'm going to win." The next night, Claire did the unthinkable. She walked into the most exclusive event of the year, a room filled with the very people who wanted her gone, and she owned it. Every step she took, she could feel the stares, the whispers. Look at her, she actually showed up. Does she have no shame? She's just proving she's desperate. Claire ignored them all. She smiled at the servers, the real workers in the room. She held her head high, even when she spotted the journalists who had tried to ruin her. And when Logan stepped up beside her, placing a hand on her back, she didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She didn't run. Because they were the ones who should be afraid, not her. And when it was time for the main event, the culinary showcase, Claire stepped forward. She looked at the crowd, at the skeptics, at the doubters. Then she cooked. Her hands didn't shake. Her knife was steady. Every movement was intentional. She wasn't just cooking, she was sending a message. They had tried to shame her, to erase her, to silence her. But they had failed. Because now she was standing in front of them, proving once again that she belonged. The dish was plated. The judges tasted. The room waited. Then, one judge set down their fork, cleared their throat, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is perfection. The system tried to break her. But now she was unbreakable. They had doubted her. They had humiliated her. They had tried to erase her. But tonight, Claire Evans was about to make history, and there was nothing they could do to stop her. The air inside the grand culinary gala was thick with wealth and ego. The chandeliers overhead cast a golden glow over the sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. Waiters weaved through the crowd with silver trays, serving delicacies that cost more than Claire's entire monthly paycheck. This was the world that had rejected her, and yet here she stood, in the heart of it. A woman who wasn't supposed to be here, a woman who refused to leave. Logan Carter stood at her side, ever the unshakable force. He had pulled strings, made calls, and put her name on the guest list, but he couldn't fight this battle for her. That was her job. And when the time came, she didn't hesitate, because she knew they were waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to prove that she wasn't worthy. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. It happened just as she had expected. The moment she walked up to the main tasting panel, the whispers turned into full-fledged challenges. Then came the voice, sharp, condescending, dripping with malice. Miss Evans. The voice belonged to Victor Lancaster, a man whose name carried weight in every culinary circle. A critic so feared that a single negative review from him could end a chef's career overnight. He stepped forward, eyes filled with amusement. "You've certainly made a name for yourself," he said smoothly. "Quite impressive, considering your lack of formal training." The crowd chuckled. Claire didn't. Victor took a glass of wine from a passing server, swirling it lazily as he continued. "But tell me," he mused, "what exactly gives you the right to judge fine cuisine? Because as far as I can tell, you're just a woman who got lucky." The crowd stilled. Claire felt the weight of every single eye in the room turning to her, waiting, watching, expecting her to crumble. She didn't. Instead, she stepped forward and smiled. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Lancaster," she said smoothly. "But why don't we let the food speak for itself?" Victor raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" She gestured toward the tasting table. "Pick any dish," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. "I'll give you my honest critique." The challenge was set. Victor's smirk deepened. He turned to the selection of plates before him, plucked one at random, and slid it toward her. Claire didn't hesitate. She picked up a fork, sliced off a bite, and placed it on her tongue. She let the flavors sit, analyzed them. Then she swallowed and spoke. "This dish," she said, her voice steady, "is a lie." The room froze. Victor's smirk twitched. "Excuse me?" Claire set the fork down with deliberate slowness. "This dish," she repeated, "was made with third-rate ingredients, hidden beneath excessive seasoning and plating tricks." The air crackled. She picked up a napkin, dabbing her lips before continuing. "It's the perfect representation of how people like you judge talent, by how it looks, rather than what it truly is." The room was dead silent. Victor's smirk disappeared. Claire took a step closer, her voice like a blade. "You assume someone like me, someone without a degree, without Michelin stars, without wealth, could never understand food the way you do." She tilted her head. "But what does it say about you, Mr. Lancaster, that I saw through this dish before you did?" A single gasp broke the silence. Then, whispers, murmurs. The crowd had turned. Logan smirked, arms crossed. Victor's face darkened, his hand tightening around his wine glass. But Claire? Claire didn't wait for his response. She had already won. That night, Claire walked out of that event with her head held high. She had walked into their world, into their battlefield, and she had destroyed them, not with money, not with status, not with the backing of the elite, with nothing but the truth. And that was something no one could ever take from her. She had proven her place. And from that moment forward, no one dared question her again. Claire wasn't supposed to win. They had spent their lives believing they were superior, until she exposed them. Tonight, she didn't just prove them wrong. She humiliated them. And now, I have one question for you. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever wanted to prove someone wrong? Comment, "They never saw me coming," if you've ever fought for your place. Hit like if you love seeing the underdog rise. And don't go anywhere, because Claire's biggest challenge? It's still ahead. You won't believe what happens next. Subscribe now, because the next part of this story, it's about to get even more brutal. You won't want to miss it. For months, they had doubted her. For weeks, they had ridiculed her. For days, they had plotted against her. But in one single moment, Claire Evans would make them all swallow their words. Tonight wasn't just about food. It was about revenge. And Claire was about to serve it cold. The air inside the Michelin Star Culinary Awards was thick with tension. The elite of the culinary world sat at long, candle-lit tables, swirling expensive wine and whispering behind gilded menus. Tonight was their night, their chance to control the narrative, to remind everyone that only those born into power, those bred for success, deserved a seat at their table. Claire had never been invited. She had fought her way in. And now she stood at the front of the grand dining hall, hands steady, eyes sharp, as her dish, the one that had ignited a war, was placed before the most feared critic in the industry, Jack Morrow, a man whose word could make or destroy careers overnight. The moment he picked up his fork, the room held its breath. Claire refused to look away. She had nothing to fear, because she already knew the truth. This dish? It was flawless. Jack Morrow wasn't a man who showed emotion. His critiques were brutal, cold, unforgiving. He never reacted, never flinched, never smiled. And yet, the second he placed the first bite in his mouth, something shifted. A beat of silence, a slow, deliberate chew, a moment of realization. Then, he set his fork down, leaned back in his chair, and said the words that shattered the world. She's right. No one moved. No one breathed. Victor Lancaster, the critic who had tried to humiliate her, went rigid in his seat. The chefs who had scoffed at her gripped their glasses like lifelines. The socialites who had dismissed her blinked in disbelief. Even Logan Carter, who had backed her from the very beginning, tilted his head slightly, his smirk barely visible. But Jack Morrow wasn't done. He lifted his gaze, letting it settle on every person in the room before continuing. "She saw what none of you did," he said, voice smooth as steel. "She understood the flaws, the technique, the deception behind the plating. And most importantly," he looked back at Claire, "she told the truth." The whispers began immediately. "Is he serious? This isn't possible. But she's just—" They didn't finish that sentence, because now there was no excuse. No narrative they could twist, no lie they could hide behind. Claire Evans had been right, and Jack Morrow had just confirmed it. She hadn't just earned her place at the table, she had just taken over the whole damn room. And the ones who had laughed at her, the ones who had doubted her, now they sat silent, watching, seething, losing. Amidst the chaos, the disbelief, the rapid shift in power, Logan Carter grinned. He leaned toward her, voice low enough for only her to hear. "I told you," he murmured, eyes gleaming. "You belong here." Claire exhaled, the weight of the night finally settling on her shoulders. She had fought for this. She had bled for this. And now, standing in the heart of a world that had once rejected her, she knew this wasn't their choice anymore. It wasn't their approval that defined her. She had carved her own damn place into history, and they would never, never be able to take it back. Claire Evans had spent her entire life being told who she was. A nobody, a janitor, a woman who didn't belong. But today the world knew her name, and not because of scandal, not because of rumors, but because she had earned it. The headlines no longer mocked her. They no longer whispered lies about Logan Carter, about how she got here. Instead, they told the truth. Claire Evans, the culinary prodigy who took on the elite and won. From scrubbing floors to judging Michelin star chefs, the woman who redefined fine dining. She was never just a janitor, she was a revolution waiting to happen. The very same critics who had once laughed at her, now they wanted her approval. The chefs who had mocked her talent, now they respected her, and the world that had tried to push her out, now they were the ones begging to let her in. Claire didn't just prove she could survive in this industry, she changed it. She wasn't a maid anymore. She wasn't an underdog. She wasn't an outsider. She was now the executive culinary advisor of Carter Hotels. Her word held weight. Her opinion shaped menus, restaurants, entire food programs. And for the first time in her life, no one could tell her what she was worth. She had decided that for herself. That night, after the storm had passed, after the whispers had turned to applause, after the world had finally caught up to the truth, Claire stood on the hotel rooftop taking in the city skyline. Logan Carter leaned beside her, watching her carefully. "You did it," he said, the pride unmistakable in his voice. Claire smirked, glancing at him. "Did I?" He huffed a small laugh. "You didn't just prove them wrong, you changed the whole damn game." She exhaled, feeling the weight of everything she had fought for, everything she had endured. The battles, the betrayals, the moments when she thought she wouldn't make it, and yet, here she was, still standing, stronger than ever. Logan studied her, his voice quieter now. "So," he asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, "are you ready for the next chapter?" Claire turned toward him, her own smirk forming. A challenge, a promise, a warning. "You have no idea what I'm about to do next." She had won. But this was only the beginning. Claire Evans' journey wasn't just about success. It wasn't just about proving the critics wrong or shutting down those who doubted her. It was about fighting for her own worth. The world will always try to define you. They will tell you who you are, what you deserve, and where you belong. They will create rules, build walls, and expect you to stay in your place. But here's the truth they never want you to realize. You don't need their permission to rise. Claire started as a woman who was looked down upon, underestimated, and dismissed, a janitor, a nobody in their eyes. And yet, she didn't let their perception of her become her reality. She fought. She refused to accept the role they assigned her. She didn't beg for validation or ask for an opportunity. She took it. She forced the world to see her. And in doing so, she didn't just prove her worth. She rewrote the rules of the game. That is the lesson. You don't have to be born into privilege. You don't have to wait for someone to open the door for you. If they won't give you a seat at the table, build your own damn table. Because no one gets to decide what you're capable of, except for you. Claire's story may have taken place in the high-stakes world of fine dining, but the truth is, this applies to every single one of us. Maybe you're working a job where no one sees your potential. Maybe you have dreams that people laugh at. Maybe you've been told that you're not good enough, not qualified enough, not worthy enough. And maybe, just like Claire, you felt like you were stuck in a world that refuses to recognize your value. But listen, that doesn't mean you stop fighting. You push harder. You prove them wrong. Not out of spite, not because you need their approval, but because you owe it to yourself. You owe it to the person you are becoming. Because the truth is, the most successful people, the ones who rise, the ones who lead, the ones who change the game, they were all doubted once. They were all told they couldn't do it. And yet, they did it anyway. That is the power of resilience. That is the power of believing in yourself when no one else will. And that is the power you hold, right now, in this very moment. So whatever it is you're chasing, chase it harder. Whatever it is you're afraid of, face it head on. And whatever limits they've placed on you, shatter them. Because one day, just like Claire, you will look back and realize they never had the power to define you. You did. Claire Evans started her journey as an outsider, fighting to be seen. Now, she isn't just seen, she's unstoppable. She didn't just climb to the top, she changed the entire landscape. And that is the ultimate victory. So now the only question that remains is, what about you? What's stopping you from proving your worth? Who is telling you that you can't do it? And more importantly, why are you still listening? It's time to write your own story. If this message resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it, and drop a comment below. Tell us your story. And if you're ready to keep fighting, if you're ready to prove them wrong, subscribe to the channel. Because this is only the beginning.